Hello class, this is Professor Quigley and I'm here to help you get through Chapter 9.9. And in this problem we are going to accept an array of integers from the user. So we're going to have the user fill up via a for loop all 5 different values that we're going to accept from them. Then what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if the values that they've given us is all even, or if they're all odd, or if neither is the case. And we're going to do this by creating 2 functions. One function is going to be called let's see, what's it actually going to be called? Count evens in an array, and there's going to be another one that's going to be called count odds in an array. And what we're going to do in our actual main function is we're going to do a couple if statements where we're going to check to see, we're going to pass that array in, and then it's going to return to us the number of evens and the number of odds. And then we're going to check that against the size of the array to be able to make that determination. So, sounds complicated, but I promise if you just get some popcorn. No, don't get popcorn. If you actually, in one screen, kind of open up the video, and then in another browser tab here, if you could kind of position it so you can follow along, I promise you it will make sense. So let's go ahead and get started here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the function that counts the evens in an array. So I'm going to hit copy, hit paste. And so right here, for those of you, you guys should know this already, but if you're getting stumped on this, it'd probably be good for me to iterate it again. We're declaring a function. It's going to be called count evens in an array. It's going to accept an array who has to be an integer array. We're going to call that user values, and this function is going to return. It's going to return an integer called num even. Now, important thing to know is that even though we're passing into an array, even though we're passing into this function an array, we're only returning back a single integer. And so this way, our function will be able to say, hey, give me all 5 values that you got from the user. It'll do its little magic, and it's going to return the exact number that are even, or in this function over here, the number that are odd. All right, so if I hit enter, if I do my 3 spaces there, I'm going to say integer I. I like using integer I because I think it's best practice when you look up code samples on the internet. I know many of you in your discussion threads are using X, and you're doing for X in your for loops. I like I, and you'll notice that when you find code, a lot of people use I because I is short for iteration or index. We're going to need a variable called num even, and we're going to set num even to equal 0. Then we're going to do our for loop. So for I equals 0, that's where it's going to start. And then we're going to say as long as I is less than user vals dot size. You always want to do user vals dot size, so that way your code can be dynamic and accept any array size. Then we're going to say I equals I plus 1. We'll do 3 spaces here so that we know this code will only execute inside of that for loop. And we're going to say if user vals, this particular iteration over that array, if user val index modulo 2 equals 0, which basically is saying if that number sitting there in that array slot, so say if we go over the first index, then we go over the second index and the third index, say if that index is 4. If 2 goes into 4 evenly with a remainder of 0, then we can assume that number is even. Actually, we're not even assuming. We've actually checked it. So num even equals num even, whatever it was before, plus 1. And what we're doing here is because we're starting num even equals 0, so every time we hit an item in this array that has an even value, we're going to count 1. That way, we'll know later on in our program that if I gave you 5 values and it returns 5, then we could assume that all of them are even. So now, we're going to do the same thing for odds. Let's go ahead and write that one. Oops. Copy. We'll hit paste. Now notice the variable names are a little different in here, so rather than num even, we're doing paste. So I'm going to go ahead and actually copy and paste this. I'll hit, actually I think I got to copy it all the way there. Copy, and we'll do paste. Still going to use integer I. Rather than num even, I'm going to call it num odd. And then I'm going to say I, we'll keep going, user val, But this time, when I'm checking to see odds, I'm going to say, hey, if it equals 1, like if there's a remainder of 1 when you divide it by 2, then I know that that number was actually an odd. So if I double-click this, see, click that paste, boom. Again, the lazy engineers are the best because they're the fastest. Okay. So now I'm going to go back here. Oops, I went and hit backspace and I hit F12. Okay, so now we're going to declare our main function. And our main function is where the application is actually going to start, and that's where it's going to call these two helpful functions that we've written so far. So we're going to do function main. Now remember, it's still a function even though it's the main program. So it still has parentheses in there, but we don't pass anything in at this time. So we'll do returns nothing. So this program doesn't return nothing. Keep in mind, like in a future class, you might actually learn that your main program can accept arguments. It is possible to say, hey, go ahead and start this program and assume these values when the program starts, and then have that program actually return something back to another program. So it is possible. That's why we still go through that exercise of writing the parentheses in the return statement, because it is possible, but not in this class. All right. So in our main thing, we're going to in our main function here, our main program, we're going to declare an integer. It's going to be an integer array 5. So remember, an array is just a data type. It just so happens to be a data type that holds 5 integers. So integer array 5. We're going to call this user val, so that way it's consistent with the rest of our code. We'll go ahead and declare. Man, I can't type or spell or talk today. Integer. We'll do I for our iteration again. And we're going to do it, so we'll just say, actually I'm getting lazy here, so let's do this. Copy and paste. So same thing. Do my 3 spaces, but I'm going to say user vals, and I'm going to say that index there equals get next input. All right. Now I'm going to backspace. I want to go back to make sure my cursor is even with the F because I don't want my code to be underneath that for loop anymore. I want this line I'm about to write on line 24 to execute after it's finished that for loop. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to do if count evens in array, and we'll pass in user vals equals user vals.size. Okay, now let me explain what I just wrote there. When you call a function, so on line 24, when this line of code executes, you could think of it as being replaced with whatever that function is returning. So if that function is going to return a number, let's just say it's going to return 5. It's line 24. It's kind of like saying if 5 equals user values.size. So it's okay to actually write the whole function there in an if statement. I think that's where some people might have gotten confused this week. So if count evens in an array, you pass in the array, that's going to return the number. So if the number that returns, if the number of items that are even equals the number that the array holds, then it's safe to say put all even to output. Backspace, and we'll do an else if, and this time we'll call the other function count odd, because I'm getting lazy. It's not so much that I'm lazy, also I don't feel like wasting time whenever I have a typo. So we'll do user vals, and then we'll say if this one equals user vals.size, which basically means if the number of items in an array equal the number that is odd, then I'm going to put all odd to output. And we'll do a final else, which means if none of those previous if statements were true, we'll output put not all even or all odd to output. All right, so let's check this out and see how well we did. So I'm going to hit check. Oh, now your troubleshooting skills in week 9 should be getting better. So I could see right here your output, this, versus my expected output is this, so I can see I have a typo, so non versus not. So I'm going to go back and find that. So right here, I'll hit next so I can edit it. Scroll down, it's kind of annoying. Go back here, change that to a T, hit check, boom, and we are good. So again, a problem that we did earlier, the intent of it in this exercise is to understand how to take that code we wrote earlier in the course, break it apart into functions, and take an array, pass it into a function, and yet we also returned not the array, we returned something totally different back. And we put it into an if statement. So you're kind of starting to see all the creative different ways in which you can string together all this different stuff we're learning into a bigger application that solves a real-world problem. But I appreciate you allowing me to help you through this problem. If there's anything about it that you would like me to explain in more detail, reach out to me in the discussion threads. But until then, I will see you on the next problem. Take care.